So, look at them. Can someone take a picture? Oh, yeah, thanks. Excellent. So, I am personally really happy to have all these wonderful people on the stage. I know all of them personally. I've worked with some of them. Some of them are my neighbors. And I think it's really a fantastic group. And so I am going to introduce them one by one, mentioning something interesting about them. And of course, I expect the warmest of applauses for each of them. Let's start by the most beardy one, although it's a bit of a challenge, but I think that guy is more beard. Thiago. Thiago works at Lincoln. He has a t-shirt of his company, and he has Beatles tattooed on his arm. They could really be anyone, but we like to think they're Beatles. He likes to get around. But one fact, he gets a new tattoo every January.
Wow.
So, why is that, yeah?
The newest one, the newest one is this one. It's all with the dogs. You cannot see it.
All right, big applause for Thiago. So, to Thiago's right, we got Judy. We used to work together until very recently at Ace and Tate. How many of you know this glasses company? Yay, Ace and Tate!
Which one?
Ace and Tate. Well, the fun thing about Judy is, in fact, she claims that she owns more pair of glasses than shoes. Now, do we believe that? Is that true, Judy? 14
pairs of glasses.
Okay. And you have less than 14 pairs of shoes. Guys, that deserves an applause. Moving on, we have, well, Sobhi, you already met the little fellow. Sobhi, there's some obscure things you don't know about Sobhi. One of them, he once was a book smuggler at the border of Egypt.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to tell us the story yourself.
Yeah. Well, actually, it happened last year, a few months ago. A few months ago, I was in Egypt for a diving course, and I noticed that next to the diving place there's a bookshop. And I entered because I love books, and I saw how cheap they were. I was like, wow, I'm buying those books. So I think I ended up with something like 20. And while crossing the borders, the border police just didn't believe that this was for personal use. They were like, what are you doing with this? So yeah, they stopped me for that.
Smuggler of culture. Applause for Sobhi. Going ahead. Extreme left, right?
Your position.
Yes, that's my name.
So that's Lian. She works for Container Solution, also on her t-shirt. I have done many talks with one of her colleagues, Adam. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here with us tonight. He's still alive, but he's in Germany. And be very careful if you have an argument with Lian. Because in fact, she wanted, when she was a kid, she wanted to become a judge in the Federal Constitutional Court of Germany. You know, not easy stuff. So make sure you always agree with her. Lian. And then the Tab, she works at an IT consultant at Info Support. And this is probably the cutest of all the fun facts we've seen so far. She tries to spend all of her free time doing volunteering at animal shelters. How sweet is that? Yeah, also, I think the talk that Sobhi gave us was really interesting. And I'm sure there's lots of questions that will come up. I just have a couple of things that I would like to, a couple of topics I would like to touch on. The first one, actually, in fact, just as a bit of a personal introduction as well, because we have such a diverse crowd in terms of what they do and just the way they look. What's your experience with diversity in tech? Let's start with Thiago.
Least diverse. Yeah, so my experience with it was always on the microaggressions part. Something that really bothered me all the time, not aimed at me, but at other people at my teams. And it's those small things, like you have a young woman PO, and everybody looks at the old lead tech person to ask for stuff, even though she's the one that should be making those decisions. But because people think like, she's just a young woman, blonde, and Dutch, doesn't know anything. Let me ask this Chinese senior tech person about business stuff. And I always try to be the one like, hey, look at her, she's the one making the most of the decisions. Hey, stop doing this. This microaggression is what I noticed since I started working in tech, in a non-diverse thing. I'm a little bit biased in the sense that I didn't study computer engineering. I studied math, and my class was more half-half, I think, than the majority of the course. And also my wife is a front-end developer. So I have to hear all the time this microaggression and all these things that happen on this board. And now that I'm a lead, I try to push for hiring more diverse people, not just by different colors, race or stuff, but more on different ways of thinking as well. So if I have an option of 2 Dutch guys that study at TU Delft, I probably will hire just one because there is a very big chance that they are very similar in the way that they approach problems. And I try to get different ways of thinking. But I personally haven't experienced much aimed at me, being a white, cis male in this world. So. Cisgender.
Where are you from?
I'm originally from Brazil, but I lived in different places all over it. So I lived in Argentina, in Canada, here in Brazil. My father was from the army, so I moved city every 2 years. So I've been adjusted to different places.
Yeah. I've been working in tech for the last 10 years. I'm a software engineer. And my experience was, I think, like most women engineers, and maybe just most women in general, that I was discouraged from pursuing a career in tech, like from my parents. It started with my parents, just like, oh, you're a girl, you should do girl things, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And it was, oh, you're pretty good in math for a girl. So for me, it kind of evens out because I am a woman, but then I'm an Asian woman, so probably I'm pretty good at math. Which is like, you laugh, but it's actually, I can see that in people's eyes, literally, because I've been doing public speaking for 3 years. I talk about machine learning, actually, so that's actually, I would like to get into that more. And I can see people, they see me walking on stage and they immediately go like this. Like, oh, just prove to me that you can, like you're allowed to talk about things, and then if you prove it to me, then I will listen to you. That's kind of, kind of like what you said also. That's my experience with it. I feel now I'm a more senior engineer, and now I feel more comfortable saying like, I'm not letting you speak to me like that. Like I'm the senior person here, but you have to get to that point. And I just always used to envy men because they just seem to be born with this kind of self-confidence that even though they don't know anything, they will still command a room. But yeah, I understand now it's not like they're not born with it. They just have the luck that most of the time they're being told, yes, you're right. Like no matter what you say, you're right. Whereas most women just kind of grow up with the kind of, feeling that better not say anything in case you're wrong.
So for me, relatively similar experiences to you, while at the disadvantage that I'm not Asian, so I also don't even know mathematics, it's just I don't know anything. But I was born in Croatia, and I was like the first generation immediately after the war that went to school, etc. and we didn't really have access to that much like new technology, etc. For example, I started to go to robotics when I was 8 years old, and like the first thing that you were supposed to be doing was you actually had to assemble the robot, because you couldn't order one, you couldn't buy one. Like, so first it was like, okay, you need to work on like the hardware components, etc. So actually the first thing that I wanted to do in my life was I really wanted to be a mechanical engineer. And in Croatia for high school, you choose like the same concept of majors, like you can go to mechanical engineering, electrical engineering and such, but at the time you're about 14 years old. And I decided like, okay, I'm going to go to mechanical engineering. My second option is perhaps going to be electrical engineering as like, you know, a backup plan. I took my papers, went to school, and there were actually like at the admissions office, there were women that were getting the papers. And when I showed up with like, yeah, I want to enroll for this program, they all started to laugh and like, oh, well, we don't have girls in this school. If you're here to search for a boyfriend, you should go someplace else. And like now I'm 28 and I know exactly how I would react, but when I was 14, I was so mortified that I actually took my papers, walked out. I ended up going to a totally different school because I was like, oh, no, like, am I really here because I want to find a boyfriend, or is it like something that I'm really passionate about? And at the time, I also really perceived it as, well, you know, it was a problem with me, not the problem with the outlook. So actually it took me ever since I was 14 until the university, and then especially until my master's, to go back to the tech world. And at the time I needed to substitute so much of like the lack of background that I had because I didn't have the school that I wanted to do. And currently I work as an IT consultant in a company that is, well, they operate in Dutch and Belgian market, 750 people, out of which, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15% of the tech people are females. But like, they really try, but on the other hand, I think it's like a deeper problem for like why you cannot get sufficient number of women at these jobs. And I do mainly like data analytics, machine learning, and those things. And constantly, I still get the looks of, well, you know, I show up. I really like wearing dresses and heels, etc. It's like, oh, she's probably doing HR or marketing or something. And you always have to prove that, like, no. I'm actually here to do a model for you. So yeah.
I studied anthropology. Started with cultural anthropology and switched to organizational anthropology. After that, I decided I wanted to go into recruitment. Tech recruitment specifically. I think you all love the tech recruiters in this world. Yeah. I did this for 6 months because I hated it, but I currently work as a PO at Ace Date, and one of the things I just discussed with my colleagues in the break was about searching for the cultural fit when hiring. And I've been struggling with this whole thing of a cultural fit, because what's a cultural fit? Is that someone who looks the same, or someone who has the same ideas, or someone who expresses themselves in a similar way, or at least someone who you can easily communicate with? And I've seen the search for the cultural fit with the different companies that I've worked for and that I've been a part of, or did an internship with, and I think what it creates is the opposite of a diverse team, because you're constantly looking for something that's, well, someone that thinks alike. And I think at least becoming aware of looking for a cultural fit, whatever it may be, because you can look for a cultural fit, but how you define the fit, I think, is really important in how you construct your teams in a company, and both from a personal perspective, but also from a company point of view. I don't think you'll get the best result out of your people and out of the company if you just hire people who are so similar and all have the same great ideas and all support each other, but never get never challenge each other in a different way. So that's experience.
Well, for me, my experience actually with it personally was when I started working. It was called something like a content editor, and basically I was hired for that job because I could speak Arabic. And our person in the company was in the QA department because the product was in Arabic, and that's it. So it is also like for me, it was very much about that you are hired for that specific job, or not hired because you're just not fulfilling that. And when you talked about actually cultural fit, 2 weeks ago I gave a workshop at Netflix, and I loved, I must say, the culture, like in the sense like when we talk about cultural fit, like even like that they called me to give a workshop about trust. I thought that's already a nice topic because that's what they really wanted to focus on. But one of the things that, like when you mentioned your story, you reminded me of my friend, Nadia, because she actually was never ever encouraged to go that path. Everyone was like, come on, just become a teacher. Like, why to go to tech? And yeah. And actually, like, you know, that was like kind of like the path that everyone wanted her to do. And I think if you are not like with that, I would say like fighting spirit, you just would give up, because at a certain point you would be like, okay, like I won't stand in the front of everyone I know just because this is my dream, if you're really not fully there. So, well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories.
It seems we have a bit of a machine learning topic coming. So, yes, indeed, Sobhi mentioned about biases in machine learning. So, what do you guys think about it? Is that, have you seen cases for first person?
Is this for the rest of it?
Well, it's for everybody. But please from the crowd, any questions? Please raise your hand and we'll get your microphone to you. But first, I want to ask Thea. She looks like she did something.
Yeah, I actually wanted to really address this topic because it is also something that I really face when I'm also building the models and training them. And although I do agree that part of the problem is that you know, the models are created by people that have their own biases, etc. But on the other hand, I don't think necessarily that the models themselves are always lying, because, for example, there was a case, especially in the US, with credit rating, that always showed that people with like Hispanic or African American background are bigger liability for the loan companies for like repaying back the money, etc. And unfortunately, I don't think like the problem was with the model, because in that case, at least, like the data set was made like anonymized but kept public, so you were able to go through it, and it actually did show, but it's actually indicating not that the creator of the model was problematic, but actually that those communities are put at a disadvantage for years and years when it comes to education, the job opportunities that they are given, etc. So it's actually, you know, indicating that there is a problem with the society that is way deeper than just being biased, that actually, you know, they really are at a disadvantage, and you can try to include them, etc., but the opportunities that they're going to be given are automatically way behind. And I think that is something that is happening very often, that those models are actually showing us that, okay, you know, something is really off with the society, but we're just like, nah, we're just going to move the model, we will modify it a little bit to be like more optimistic, without actually addressing what caused it to be terrible. Because I think like the change that is required to solve that problem is so large, so comprehensive, that it will take us, you know, decades of changing the mindset, of changing the people, changing the communities, in order to make us all completely equal. So that is something that I wanted to address about this, that.
But it's kind of what he said, that the algorithms kind of amplify what's already there. And so just instead of just looking at what the output of the algorithm, it actually amplifies, you know, what's wrong at kind of the root level. That's what I used to say.
Just one thing on this, I also work with machine 3 here. So one thing that I say about this, I don't know, it's a little bit communist from my side on some point, but is that the main problem for this kind of thing is not that the data set is wrong or the algorithm is wrong. It's about the explainability. So if you give a prediction to someone that someone is more likely to default in a loan, but you cannot explain why the algorithm said that to him, that's like an intangible thing that the person cannot contest and cannot improve. So if you have a model that you can explain to her, hey, you are default because you have a credit risk of this in your last bank account, and because we found out that you were from African American descendants, then the person will be like, whoa, but that part I cannot change. I can change my risk, I can change my default, but this one, that was part of it. There was nothing that I can do, and then you can talk. But when you put an algorithm, people see it as something that you cannot contest. It's a truth. There is a very, very, very good book called Weapons of Math Destruction that talks exactly about this, about how people treat algorithms as a universal truth that you cannot do anything against it. And that is a part that is a little bit tricky for me.
Thank you. So another thing, so anyone who's interested in how AI is changing our society, there is an amazing woman talking about the Zeta prefecture. I don't know if you know, she talks a lot about it. Last time I saw about her was, we're creating a dystopia just so people click on ads. That was a really, really good talk, a 20 minutes TED talk, where she explains the YouTube radicalization process. So basically you start YouTube, you like watch a Trump rally. And then the next video you get recommended by this machinery system is like, how liberals destroy America, whatever. Like some more far right thing. And then the next video is like even more extreme, even more radicalized. So I think, yes, we have like machine learning models themselves amplify racism or our biases, yes. But even worse is that our whole bias system makes it so much easier for the already privileged to like wrap themselves up into this bubble where in their universe there's no such thing as racism because there's a black person here, so there's no racism really. And then for everyone else, it's like super hard to get out of this bubble kind of. So I just wanted to raise that you should watch her talks. She's really good.
What's your name?
Zainab Tufekci, I just talk to me after. And
Can you post it in the group after?
Sorry?
Oh
yes, I can post it in the meetup.
I have a question. As Sophie said in his speech, maybe it's also good to look at the solution type of things. What are your ideas for tackling the problem of diversity in tech, starting from Amsterdam, Netherlands? What would be your suggestions for companies to do to have like more diverse?
That's a very good question. So for one thing, I think the whole like inclusion that you said, that the difference between diversity and inclusion. For inclusion, it's just one very simple thing is just always ask yourself, but what if someone was different than I am? So we're here at this meetup and there was great pizza, delicious pizza, but what if someone was different than me and was vegan? Because there's cheese on those pizzas and they couldn't eat it.
Oh, yeah.
What if someone was different and, didn't like pizza? Maybe they are on a diet or whatever, or they just don't want to eat, but it's gluten in there or whatever. Just always ask yourself, okay, this works for me, but, it doesn't work for everyone. So that's one thing that you can always
That counts as next.
And that's like, thanks for the pizza. I'm just saying that, and then also always listen to other people. So I just checked Twitter, and you posted someone on Twitter like, oh, if you're in Amsterdam and you want to talk about diversity, and like, of course there was a dude who was like, yeah, we don't have to do anything, it's pretty diverse. Even if you think that, still go there, because other people might think differently, and their opinion is also very, even more valuable if you think differently. So every time someone challenges your opinion, you should listen to them.
One thing that I'm very fond of doing, and I do a lot that to my company, because I'm in a more leading position in a managing partner, is that we have this thing that we always hire people fresh out of college and things like that, and treat them as mentees, so we give them internal training for 2 months. And for these people that we hire as the first job, I push as much as possible to have Muslim, woman, transgender, because for the entry level, so if I can push on that, for me it's easy to convince everyone around. Because if you go into the higher level for the senior, you always have that pushback to be like, no, we have to hire the best. You cannot do reverse discrimination. Even though it makes no sense, because usually it's the white dude saying this. But you get that pushback a lot, that I try to convince them all the time that it's not discrimination if you are picking up someone that was in a more adverse part, and you cannot judge someone by just looking at how good they code, how they talk, and the culture fit is also something that I discuss a lot, because for me, culture fit, you have some core things that are culture fit for a company, but the rest you should push all the boundaries. You should hire people that make your audio engineers a little bit uncomfortable and confront them. Otherwise, you never grow. But I think hiring and pushing for this thing. I come from a country, Brazil, that has a very big discrepancy. Like we have 70% of black and mixed people that are not in the higher classes. They are all in the lower classes, and we implemented a lot of quotas for them, for public university schools and all of it. I'm completely up for that in the case of Brazil, but other places would not take that lightly. If I come here to the Netherlands and say like 10% of the C-level or 50% of the C-level of companies need to be women or black or something, I think the liberals part of people would be like, no, this is not capitalism or something. But this is another discussion that we need to take. But I think we should start small and hiring more entry-level people and pushing them so we can have more diverse people a little bit in the future. Because now the market is a little bit fucked up in a sense. When I see people like Lian and other women engineers are the best engineers that I know, because one thing, they have to be the best engineers to survive in a market. You have so many mediocre white males working on IT because they just need to be white males to be there. Women have to be the best engineers to be there. So.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you both made a very, very good point. I think another part, if you look at, we're asking specifically what do we need to change within the Netherlands, within Amsterdam, to get more diversity in tech. As a recruiter in the tech department, I think maybe 10 or 20% of the applicants were female, and of course they were from different backgrounds, different countries, but you also get a lot less applicants. And if you look at what interests people, what interests women versus men, this was already addressed earlier tonight. I think this interests into something, you know, whether it's homemaking and taking care, or whether it's engineering, software engineering, or technical engineering, or anything. This already starts when you're 1, 2, 3 years old. What kind of behavior gets rewarded in elementary school? And I think, nice. Little refill for everyone. Very nice. Especially in the Netherlands, I think in traditional education, girls get rewarded for specific behavior, and boys get addressed very differently. And if you look at how men or boys and girls are triggered to pursue certain things that they want to do in their life, it's just they're treated very, very differently. And I think this gender bias that you already learn in school, that as a girl you have to behave and you have to look pretty and you have, that gets rewarded, all those things. And that's where I think it starts, where if you really want to make a difference, and the thing is, the shitty part is, the result is going to happen in 30 years. But I think that's where we need to start, to really make an impact and get more women intrinsically interested and intrinsically motivated to be part of a tech team, for example.
Cool.
a topic that I had in mind, and then Sobhi actually talked about it during the first talk. In fact, I even have a slide for it with a description. And it's something that I'm really asking for your advice. And maybe it's a bit of a controversial thing, but here we go. A friend of mine used to work for one of these big internet giants in the States, and a big internet giant. And they were at a work dinner, everybody around the table, and then this friend of mine. So he mentioned a story where, let me find the slide. So he had a cat, and his cat had kittens. Super sweet, right? And then during this dinner, he mentioned, don't know exactly the sentence, but he mentioned that two of these kittens were competing for one nipple of the mom. And when he said nipple, the entire table froze. And everybody looked at him like he was coming from Mars or something. And then after dinner, they told him, you can't say this. That's off limits. And so my first reaction is probably the one that maybe some of you have had right now, which is, that's way exaggerated. But then, if you connect, with what Sobhi mentioned earlier, then I thought the idea here is to forbid something, even beyond reasonable, to make sure that nothing violent gets said. And this is where I leave it to you guys. How about this?
Well, I can respond to this. I always say it's always about context. Context, context, context. And I think, that I can give you this thing. In one of my workplaces, previously, I would have on my table dildos and vibrators and other things. But it's always about the context, because I was working for an organization that was focusing on sexual health and sexual rights. And we were writing articles for people just to know how to kiss. Because we were also addressing people in countries where those topics were taboos. You couldn't talk about them. So it's again, goes back, if that person, in my opinion at least, mentioned it just to say something about someone, or just to, I don't know, whatever the reason is.
Cat.
I would, and I'm saying if that was said for, let's say, the wrong reason, I would get it. But it was just the word on its own, it doesn't mean anything. So what I mentioned before about trying, it's more like what Thiago said about maybe sometimes I would say always go and look for the best talent. Always. I don't think that companies need to lose money to have to tick boxes and to say we're diverse. Because also those people kind of fight it to reach those places. And as it was mentioned, you sometimes as a woman engineer, you basically fight too much just to prove it. But at the same time, and this is where I always talk about complexity, because nothing is really black and white. But also in order to society, in my opinion, to change, we need also to say, okay, we will give more chance for mentorships for women engineers because we don't have many of them, or for other marginalized groups. So I think it's also about trying to find the balanced way in between.
Thank you. I fully agree with what you said. I just want to add that these kind of rules, thinking that if you forbid this list of words and then there's going to be no violence, no sexual violence, is so wrong in my opinion. First of all, it doesn't teach responsibly talking to people, being responsible for what you say. And then, it's just the word. I had a similar situation where I drive by a shop that's called Tits every day. And I just talked to a colleague, oh, there's a store that's called Tits. And then I'm not gonna name names, but one of the C-level management just walked by and was like, COC. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that has nothing to, like, the COC is for people as a shield.
Code of conduct.
Yes, for them to defend themselves towards people who would be hurting them. It's not just like a thing that you just say, like, can't say that's COC. Like, that's just not, that's commodifying the whole idea of people who need to be, I guess, protected in some sense, but it's a very kind of, like you say, complex, not black and white thing, because if you like overprotect someone, like a lot of male engineers will suddenly say, we need to protect our women engineers. Like, no, I'm a person. We women don't have hive minds. We don't all think the same. Like, someone is offended by the use of the word nipple, and that's fine. I just talk about it. I don't care because I realize that everyone has nipples. But if someone else is men, non-gendered people, everyone,
cats too.
Animals, yes, exactly. But if someone really feels uncomfortable because they have like an uncomfortable experience with it, that should also be fine. Like, we shouldn't shame them for that either. But it's just like, just setting up rules like we can't say those words anymore is just taking away everything from the actual debate that you should be having.
On this, I think I have one like open up one question for the audience maybe. That on this war now with Twitter and Facebook and politically correct things, I personally see a lot of overreaction of things happening, especially online. With, of course, the blame and shame culture is important for a lot of stuff, but some of the things are completely taken out of context and pushed into the internet, and that I think it more backfires into like making people avoid to have the proper discussion than actually making people have a discussion about this stuff. So especially on the US, and this was an American company, I think, they have this culture of we have to make everybody like us. It's part of the American culture. You cannot have like enemies or whatever. You need to be happy and sell, and you are based on your 80% tip if you are a waiter, so you're always smiling and all this stuff. And it's part of their culture to try to not have any enemies in any point. So if they get a complaint by anyone that this is a word that I don't want to hear it, they'll put that in the ban list, and they'll just keep adding until you get to some point that you cannot discuss anything that is not politically correct according to the companies. But how do you guys see? Because I know a lot of male engineers that don't want to get into discussions like this because they are afraid they're going to say something outspoken or something, and they will be blamed and shamed by the community and be seen as anti-woman or something. So how do you see this?
Yeah, for the audience, for you.
Well, I don't have a direct answer to that question, though I do agree with you very much. There is a big discussion around Jordan Peterson in the US actually, well, but in essence, it's very much about what can you say, what can you not say, what's politically correct, what's not politically correct. Are we not actually touting into each other's horns here? I think what I want to say also with respect to the nipple question. I've lived in the US. The US is very prude. I mean, Janet Jackson is allowed to not show her nipple at the Super Bowl while Maroon 5 is, right? So I think this discussion goes very much into the it's all mixed up in so much right now. So on the one hand, you know, as women, we have to come out of this corner of something that is like dirty, like our bodies are dirty, or are we not allowed to post? Yes, we are allowed to post bikini pictures because now not everything is sexualized and shouldn't be. Because I was just hanging out by the beach and I don't usually do that in long sleeves. So that should not be the question. I think what we should be asking ourselves, if we really want to talk about what we can do, is tackling the subconscious bias ourselves. And the thing is, I feel like I'm a woke person, you know, I have like a diverse group of friends and everything, but yet I'm hiring and I'm sitting there and I have to question myself every single time, you know, why do I like that person? Is it because, and I very much agree with you, is it because actually that person is like me, I can relate, you know, or do I not like this person because he has a very strong Russian accent and I'm kind of a little suspicious. And I've really been in these situations. I have lived in China, I was the foreigner, and people were looking at me in a much different way and with a bias, absolutely. So, I'm not, when I raise my children, I certainly want to raise them in a way that they're aware of this, and I agree that, we need to start much earlier. But if we want to do something now, I think it's educating ourselves and our teams about what subconscious bias is. Where, yes, you feel you are a woke person, but when it comes to these crucial decisions, check yourself again. That's... Sorry.
Very good. All right.
I'm reading this book called Everybody Lies. I don't know if you guys have read it yet. And what I find really interesting and what I feel is happening is that we've been accustomed to constantly lying to ourselves about who we really are. And what I think is really great about technology is it's forcing us to see who we are individually and as a society. So it's preventing us from moving away from topics that have kind of been at a surface layer. And so it comes about in very uncomfortable ways, I think. And so I kind of like that to turn that back to you guys. My question is, at the moment I feel that technology has been in a way meritocratic, in that the technology speaks for itself, but that also turns out to provide some very uncomfortable truths about society, and the sense that it's become so powerful and influential puts me in a state of a bit of fear, because I feel like those technology companies then define the values that society ends up upholding in a certain way. So, for example, what things are allowed to be spoken about and what things are not. How do you guys see the responsibility of these big tech companies and the ones that you guys work for to kind of define the way society moves forward in a sort of ethically responsible way? And just to give you a background, I work in finance, so my entire view is very capital driven, and it kind of also made me very fearful that the people with money end up making decisions where technology companies end up moving towards, and then it kind of reverts back to a very uncomfortable cycle of power being held in the people who have money.
Okay, so I'm a big old lefty, and I'm sure Comrade Thiago would agree with me. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. So for one thing, all the companies want to make money, and I work for a consultancy, and one of my clients is a bank. So right out of the bat, I already know that I'm not making the world a better place by my actual job. That's just not what's happening, and I'm not deluding myself with it. There is a tendency, I think, with social media to be a bit narcissistic and kind of have this split on who you think you are, who you might want to be, and who you present yourself to other people that you are. And then there's this side of you that you actually are that you never look at because it's not on social media, so that it's not real, actually. I do think that, like what you said, is very important. What you do is to be able to say, even though I'm not a racist, like I do believe that, like everyone's equal, I still have those biases, which doesn't make me a bad person. But we need to talk about it. We need to have mechanisms to not let that influence other people's lives so much, or giving other people a chance, because I don't actually particularly like a Russian accent or whatever. So I think that's a very important thing to make it okay. That's the way. Like if a guy is scared to talk about this topic because he's scared he's saying something wrong, well, you know what? It's just part of being alive. That sometimes you're gonna say something wrong, and you just have to move on. Like that's just what's gonna happen. But it shouldn't keep you from conversing with people. I know. Sorry. What was your question? He gave me the beers. Oh, yes, ethical responsibility. Yes, so the big four, Amazon, Facebook, Google, and what's the other one now? Apple. Sorry, I was thinking about AWS, but that shouldn't be said. They do, it's not just, they don't just have ethical, like, okay, so they're like one of the biggest employers right now. That's one thing. So they're like the way they have, like their culture shapes a lot of people's lives. They also are the biggest polluters right now, and like every company that accepts Bitcoin is actually polluting a lot. So you know you should think about doing that. So there are so many things where companies have more ethical responsibility nowadays than countries because they have a bigger GDP. And my point is that we as consumers and also especially as engineers, because we are the driving force, should be more aware of the power that we actually have. Like if I'm an engineer and I'm the only engineer and my boss tells me you have to do it this way and I say no, there's nothing that he can do. Like he can't, like he doesn't have any power over the actual thing. That's on me. So I think like as engineers we need to take more responsibility for what we do ourselves.
But also to connect to the ethical responsibilities of large companies, especially, for example, Google and Facebook, and to connect it to our topic that we were discussing about what is politically correct to discuss and not, what are the sensitive topics. The role that currently both Google and Facebook have is that by creating like such a large pool of really sensitive topics and topics that should not be discussed and topics that you get offended by, you're actually bombarded by the content that is just amplifying your way of thinking already, and you don't want to discuss about what is happening in the world. So all of the content that you're going to find is whatever you are actually believing. So it actually, the criticism of like their influence or ethics in general is they are kind of killing away like the critical thinking and critical mind, because you don't have any counter opinion. You are going to see the content from your friends that share similar opinion to you. You are going to read articles and be suggested videos, etc., of whatever you believe in, and you are going to think that that's the ultimate truth and that is what is happening in the world, because you will not see anything else. And that is something that those companies need to be aware of, but at the same time, by making so many topics so sensitive and so like, oh, we are not discussing that because we are offended by it, even though it puts us in a really comfortable position, it also in the long run further messes up our society, because we are never going outside of that box. Everybody lives in their own little bubble. They think the world is a perfect place where nothing is ever going wrong, and ta-da, like everything is big and beautiful. So.
I will give the microphone to you. Just one thing first. About the making statements that are wrongful. It's normal. Everybody's going to say something that you should have said, and people will learn from it. One of the things that we have to address better is when you know someone that screws up something, you should not point the finger and say, oh, you did something wrong, and blah, blah, blah. And that person can learn from that and become someone better. And that's the part that I think we're failing, is accepting that people change. That's the first thing. About ethical, I think your question is, nowadays, if you go to Container Solution, they have this amazing person, Anna Curry. She lives in the UK, and she is the most preoccupied with ethical in our engineering part that I know. She has its own conference about ethical in software engineering that happens in the UK. It happened the first time last year. It's going to happen again, I think, in June or July. Yes. And on QCon London, she has an ethical track. And it's something that I definitely recommend the software engineer to actually take a look into it. Is we are the persons that know how to build that stuff. We're the one actually writing the code for something. If that is going to change the way that you do your work and your things, you have the most power, just like Lian said. And you see that already. Microsoft's people are now busting Microsoft's C-level now because they have an agreement with the Pentagon for using HoloLens for augmented reality, and they had a petition with more than 5,000 signatures to say, like, I don't care how much money this contract is, we don't want Microsoft to take this contract. And this is the kind of position that I think we have to take more in this sense, and to have something to say.
You had your hand raised? Sorry.
Go for it. I don't remember what I was going to say.
Take your time.
I think it was something around the comment that everyone is saying everyone's going to make mistakes from this week. I think what we have to also be aware of, it's now 2019, there's a lot of information on the internet. We all should be more aware of what we say and maybe take a moment to think before we speak and reduce some of the things that we say by action, which I think at this point, many of us women, diversity, whatever diversity spectrum we fall in, are tired of hearing you make those same mistakes, saying those things. So I don't think it is okay that we just say and we should just all forgive. We already did that. We did the forgiving part, and now we're speaking up and saying no more. So I think that part is it. And then I had a question about something else you said. But I just wanted to say that I think that we're growing in a different spectrum, going in a different journey in the whole diversity world, and you spoke on it about diversity, inclusion, and then there's something beyond inclusion again. And we're not quite there yet, but that also means that while we're having these conversations, we should be a little bit more mindful about who we're having the conversation with and how we have it. Still can't remember my question.
Guys, I know it's hard to believe, but it is time to wrap up.
Can I just add one more thing?
I know. One more thing, yes.
One of the things that I personally really wanted to discuss, but we didn't really manage to get the opportunity. Tonight we are mainly talking about also like diversity at the workplace, etc., and how to be more inclusive while recruiting the people. But I think what we are discussing, and I will just ask because I was sitting all the way to the front, so I didn't see, but how many of you are working in tech? That's a large number. How many of you, for example, go to elementary schools, etc., and try to maybe share your knowledge or have some workshops with children and kind of try to teach them also, like, boys and girls about, well, what is it that you do? Okay, a few hands, nice.
The thing, we need to speak Dutch.
I don't speak Dutch, and I go to schools. If you talk to someone that is 10 years old, 11, they will speak perfect English.
Yeah, just say
just a problem like in this group here, but what I personally really believe in is that by the time we get to the recruiting and offering jobs, etc., and we have 15 or 20% of females or like I don't know various minorities, etc., applying for the jobs, it's already kind of too late because yeah, they are going to be worse engineers or worse computer programmers if they didn't have that background because like they weren't exposed to it since childhood. So yeah, you can try to impose quotas, etc., but it's already kind of too late. So I really do think that there are also meetups that are targeted more towards children, etc. And like if we are really passionate about those topics, like let's try and provide some training, some education. So like let's share our knowledge to start from the young age. So maybe future generations are going to do it more smarter than we did.
There's already a movement, not a movement, but what is that being called?
Initiative?
Initiative, thank you. There's already an initiative for the Dutch government to incorporate code and code thinking for primary school.
I was just going to say that, I think a lot of the conversation tonight has been focusing on the pipeline, right? Like bringing more women to the pipeline.
Keep it is important.
The focus so far, a lot of it has been on the pipeline, and I just wanted to point out that that isn't the only problem, right? We also have a leaky bucket here.
Yeah.
More women are leaving the industry than men, so I think there's a lot more to be said about what we can do to keep women in tech as well.
Yes, and on that note, we really need to blockade this place, unfortunately. But I know you hate me. So sorry about this. But what I sense though is that there's room for a lot more. For a lot more conversation. And if you look there, that's the answer. If you like, and I've been inspired by tonight and would like to go on with this conversation, reach out with your ideas, and we'll organize anything together. Really. And for now, yeah, sorry again, but please give me your warmest applause for this fantastic. And finally, if you're sitting on a Klappstuhl, please fold it and bring it right there together with the other ones. Thank you so much for attending. You have been an incredible crowd, and I wish my crowd were always this beautiful.